Good evening. I'm Danny Anderson, the president of Trinity University, and I welcome you tonight to the Maverick Lecture. I'm joined on the stage with Mark Shields, our presenter this evening, Arthur Rojas Emerson, president and CEO of KLRN Public Television, and Bill Scanlon, a co-trustee of the William and Salome Scanlon Foundation. For 10 years, the William and Salome Scanlon Foundation has underwritten the Maverick Lecture in partnership with Trinity University so that outstanding thought leaders can be brought to San Antonio and be heard free of charge by all in the community. The Family Foundation was formed in 1994 by John and Bill Scanlon to honor their parents. Salome Scanlon, a Brownsville, Texas native, was both a teacher and a homemaker who traced her South Texas roots to the Spanish settlers in 1790. Her husband, William Scanlon, also born in Brownsville, served with the State Department in Venezuela and practiced law in Brownsville and served as district judge of the 103rd Judicial District. The purpose of the foundation is to support educational, environmental, human rights, and Hispanic cultural initiatives. Because of the Scanlon Family Foundation's unwavering philanthropic sponsorship, the Trinity University community and the citizens of Bexar County have enjoyed speakers such as Sebastian Junger and Ezra Klein, just to name two. Maury Maverick was a good friend and a mentor to John and Bill Scanlon. Like Maury, both John and Bill Scanlon served in the armed services. John served as a naval officer on a destroyer in the Pacific, and Bill as an Army officer in Vietnam. Like Maury, both Scanlon brothers became lawyers, and while they both had traditional law practices, they both, again, like Maury, represented unpopular defendants. John devoted himself to civil rights litigation, and Bill represented detainees at Guantanamo Bay. We are also honored to have members of the Scanlon family with us tonight. So I'd ask you to please give some rounds of applause, and I'm going to name some names here. Bill, would you stand? And also William out in the audience. And then we also have John Scanlon. Thank you all for what you do. And now I invite to the podium Bill Scanlon for the introduction.
Gracias, Danny. First, I would like to say a few things about how the Maverick Lecture got started. And there are two women in the audience who are responsible for this. That's Naomi Shihab Nye and Jan Jarbo Russell. One day they invited me to have lunch on the river at Boudreaux's, and they suggested that we should have a Maverick Lecture to honor Maury. Lawyers being derivative people, I said, of course, let's go ahead and do it. And so we are here today because of them. And there are two others who have carried this forward by making everything happen. One is Ann Noble, who was here at Trinity during the early part of the Maverick Lectures, and today we have Kay Casey. And once again, it wouldn't be anything like it is today without those two. So I want to thank them very much. Now, this is the 10th anniversary year, and it's a privilege for me to introduce Mark Shields. The Wall Street Journal has called Mark Shields the wittiest political analyst around, and frequently the most trenchant, fair-minded, and thoughtful. The Washington Post has called him a walking almanac of American politics. Now, that's coming from around 180 degrees, with the Wall Street Journal on one side and the Washington Post on the other. Mark is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, and like Maury, he served in the Marine Corps. Then he went to Washington, where he began working for Senator William Proxmire. 3 years later, he assisted the Robert F. Kennedy presidential campaign. Over 11 years, Mark has helped manage campaigns from the courthouse to the White House in 38 states. He's a nationally known columnist and commentator. He's worked in Washington through the administration of 10 presidents. He's an editorial writer for the Washington Post, and he began writing his column in 1979. Mark also has a self-deprecating sense of humor. While we were having dinner tonight, he mentioned that he had been married for 52 years, and that his wife once said to him, "You have a face made for radio." But, Mark, there are a lot of Friday night PBS NewsHour addicts here in this office. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mark Shields. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Bill. That was a lovely introduction. And as Henry VIII said to each of his 6 wives, "Don't worry, I won't keep you long." I do come to you from Washington, D.C., and I want to establish right at the outset, I'm a little defensive about my hometown. I want to establish that not all political scandals take place in Washington. Not that many hours' drive from here last week, in a state prison, one convict turned to his cellmate and said, "You know, the food was a lot better here when you were governor." So I'm delighted to be here at Trinity at the midway point of the first Trump administration. A number of carping critics of the president have pointed out that since he's been in the White House, the president seems to have put on a few pounds. And I'm sensitive to those observations myself. And I sympathize with him. A waist is a terrible thing to mind. And I've always subscribed to the approach of Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey. They asked him if he gained weight. He said, the test of whether you've gained weight is whether, when you're sitting in the bathtub, you notice that the water level in the toilet bowl is starting to rise. So I'm thrilled to be here. I truly am. I should start right at the outset by stating my prejudices. I like politics. I believe in politics. I don't know how else in a nation as big and brawling and wonderfully diverse as ours, how else would resolve our differences except through the political process and the compromise and consensus that are forged in that political process by women and men of talent and dedication and skill. I pray that it never comes down to we do it in muscle or money or numbers or raw power. I believe in the political process. I like people who run for political office. Most of us, life is a series of quiet defeats and quiet victories. If you and I are the 2 finalists to be the general manager of the Great Lakes Coat Hanger Company, and you get the job and I don't, when the home paper announces your good news, they don't add, Shields was passed over because of questionable behavior at the company Christmas party or lingering questions about his expense account. But that isn't the way it is in politics. When you run for office, everybody you ever sat next to in study hall or double dated with or babysat for knows whether you won or more likely you lost. I've always admired candidates who could lose with grace and humor. In my half-century of covering it, I've never seen anybody do it better than a fellow named Dick Tuck, who ran for the state senate in Los Angeles. He lost by 13 votes. And when the vote was announced, a reporter from KMPC radio in Los Angeles stuck a microphone in front of his face and said, "Tell me, Mr. Tuck, how do you feel?" He said, "The people have spoken, the bastards." But I admire most of all political courage. The first time I ever slept in the same quarters with African Americans or took orders, as a matter of course, from African Americans, the Latinos, was at Parris Island, South Carolina, Marine Corps boot camp. And the only reason I did that was because a president of the United States named Harry Truman, whose grandfather had actually owned slaves, made the courageous and historic decision to desegregate the United States military forces. And Harry Truman said very simply, it is unfair, in the final analysis, un-American, to ask somebody to fight and possibly die for their country, and then to segregate them by race. I, too, admired the courage of Ronald Reagan, who, approaching his last chance to run for the presidency in 1980, he had run against President Ford, you recall, in 1976, and come within 50 votes at the Kansas City Convention. But in Reagan's adopted home state of California, where they vote on everything from the number of creams in a coffee to right turn on red to everything else, there was a proposal before the voters in 1978 called the Briggs Amendment, which would have banned and banished and criminalized anybody teaching in the public schools of California who was gay or lesbian. Not for doing anything, but for being. Similar measures had been adopted in Topeka, Kansas, St. Paul, Minnesota, Eugene, Oregon, and Dade County, Florida. And it was leading in the polls, and Ronald Reagan came out against it. Ronald Reagan said, that isn't how we judge teachers in California. We judge them whether our children learn in their classroom. And he turned it around, and it went down to defeat, and it's never been heard from again. Now, I don't mean to pretend that I was an unmixed admirer of Ronald Reagan's. I've always found him fun to cover. He was the embodiment of American optimism in the best sense of the word. And he had about him a quality that I think is desperately needed in today's leaders and would-be leaders. And that was Ronald Reagan could laugh at himself. That shows a self-confidence, a self-assurance, a lack of insecurity that is commendable and necessary in a national leader in perilous times. I remember when Reagan came to office, he was somebody who did not burn the midnight oil. He was rarely in the office before 9:30. He was never in the office after 4:30. So we in Washington, who are critical, we're carping critics, got on his case, whether he was really up to this job. It was long hours. Could he really do all this tough work? The pressure of the presidency. And so Ronald Reagan at a off-the-record dinner with reporters stood up and said, you know, they say hard work never killed anybody, but I figure why take the chance? And from that point forward, no one raised the issue again. At the same time, Ronald Reagan was fun to cover because he used to say things that were manifestly unfactual. It was not an attempt to deceive because deception was not in the man's soul. But along the way, it had been a long way. He picked up things they got on the 5x8 cards, and sometimes they didn't have a strong empirical foundation to them. We in the press bus used to call these little jewels factoids. They weren't fact, they weren't fiction, they were somewhere in between. One of Ronald Reagan's favorite factoids was there are 113 taxes on a loaf of bread. There are not 113 taxes on a loaf of bread. He was asked by a young Associated Press reporter, Governor, could you tell us your source for that? And the Gipper, with that 10,000-watt grin of his, said, Reader's Digest, April 1947. You know, right? We're in Steubenville, Ohio, and Ronald Reagan delivered what remains my all-time favorite factoid. Trees cause more pollution than automobiles. We all headed for the phones because that was as good as we're going to get. I mean, next time you're in the New Jersey Turnpike and your eyes are watering from the truck in front of you, blame a pine tree in Maine. Well, as luck would have it, and it wasn't terribly good for the Republican standard bearer that day, our next stop was in Southern California. It was the worst air pollution inversion week in the Los Angeles basin in 11 years. We went out to Claremont College where Mr. Reagan was going to speak, and some wise guy graduate student had hung a sign on a tree. It said, "Cut me down before I kill again." And to his credit, nobody laughed any harder than Ronald Reagan. People ask why some candidates get good press and other candidates don't. And I have to say, in many cases, it's because they have that kind of sense of security about themselves, a personality that allows them to laugh at themselves. I would be remiss if I didn't take a serious word about Maverick. His father, you may not know, but if you're an Irishman from Massachusetts who went to Notre Dame, you know this. His father ran Al Smith's campaign in 1928 in San Antonio, when that was not a popular assignment and there weren't a lot of people volunteering for that distinction. And Maury himself, as you people in this room may know, fought against Jim Crow laws, fought for the right of workers to organize, to bargain collectively. He helped defeat a serious effort when he was in the Texas legislature to extend the death penalty to anybody who had belonged to the Communist Party for simply belonging to the Communist Party. He represented atheists. He represented draft resistors. He was the son of Maury Maverick, of course, Senior, who helped to write the Social Security law, championed anti-lynching laws. It's a great tradition. It's a great legacy, and it's one that I'm happy and proud to be part of, just honoring tonight. And I salute the Scanlon family for their leadership and their generosity in keeping those values, that vision, that flame alive in Maury. So thank you very, very much. So somebody asked me earlier today why John McCain always had such good press coverage. John McCain, whom I liked very much, didn't think that his press coverage was absolutely terrific when he ran against Barack Obama in 2008. But he had, again, that same gift, that ability to laugh at himself. I recall one of our last breakfasts together with a group of reporters, and just a month earlier, the Gallup poll had come out, and it showed that the approval of Congress was at 15% favorable. 15% favorable. And John McCain shook his head and he said, when we're at 15% favorable, it means we're down to paid staff and blood relatives. Well, barely 2 weeks later, the new Gallup came out, and it was down to 11% favorable. And McCain came in and he said, I had a call from my 105-year-old mother, Roberta McCain, this morning, a woman of indomitable spirit and total candor. And he says, I now can tell you we're down to paid staff. So when he lost, he said that he of course had run. Barry Goldwater from Arizona had run for president unsuccessfully. So had Mo Udall, a Democrat, had run from Arizona unsuccessfully, and so had Bruce Babbitt, the Democratic governor, had sought the Democratic nomination unsuccessfully. And McCain noted, he said, Arizona's the only state where mothers don't say to their children, you study hard, you can grow up and be president someday. But he had about him that wonderful, wonderful quality, and it's an important one. When Ted Cruz, who is sometimes overlooked for his sensitivity, and he was down one day, and there'd just been a piece in the Washington paper about him being the most unpopular man in the United States Senate, and he came up to John McCain. He said, John, why is it that people take such an instant dislike to me? And John McCain said, Ted, because it saves them time. So that wasn't as good as when Justice Scalia died, so an untimely death, and there was a vacancy in the Supreme Court, and Barack Obama was president. Joe Biden, who was then vice president, urged President Obama to appoint Ted Cruz to the Supreme Court. And Obama said, Biden, why would I appoint Ted Cruz? He said, in no time at all, you'd have 8 vacancies to fill. You don't think of Mitt Romney as a funny guy, and I can say about him that I never liked Mitt Romney for a couple of reasons. One, he never had a cavity. He never had a pimple. His shirts never wrinkled. His suits never wrinkled. He had the same size waist he had when he was a senior in high school. He was always upbeat. He was perfect, is what he was. He was an Eagle Scout. But one day we were meeting with about 10 reporters, and Mitt Romney came in. He decided to flatter us, and he said, you know, I was saying to my wife, Ann, this morning, Ann, I'm meeting with all these big-time political analysts and reporters, and, you know, they're kingmakers. And I said to her, Ann, did you ever in your wildest dreams think I'd be meeting with these presidential kingmakers? And she said to me, Mitt, you're not in my wildest dreams. Now, so I give him credit for that, and the way he finessed the issue of same-sex marriage. He said, you know, as a Mormon, I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and a woman, and a woman, and a woman. I mean, so let me tell you how I see politics, and politics. Where it is in this country. First, to understand where we are now, I think you have to look at the 2016 election. To understand the 2016 election, first think of that, go back 10 years to the race between Barack Obama and John McCain. On Election Day of 2008, Barack Obama was 55% favorable among all voters. John McCain was 52% favorable among all voters. So voters were choosing between 2 favorable people. They liked them both. It was a positive choice. In 2016, Hillary Clinton, on Election Day, in the exit polls, was 43% favorable, 55% unfavorable. Donald Trump was 38% favorable, 60% unfavorable. 60% unfavorable. So that meant that Trump got the votes of several million people who had a very unfavorable impression of him, as did Clinton. Think about this. If Donald Trump had been on the ballot by himself at 38 favorable, 60% unfavorable, he would have lost. The only reason he won was because he was running against Hillary Clinton. That has to be painful. Has to be personally painful for her to know that she stood between Donald Trump and the presidency and people in the final analysis, even though he was 38% favorable, chose him. Even though by a 2-to-1 margin, voters thought he was not honest, chose him over her. It was a negative choice in 2016. Donald Trump is brilliant, make no mistake about it, at taking on and attacking any opponent. He did it with Jeb Bush, low energy, no energy Jeb, little Marco Rubio, Lion Ted Cruz, right across the board. He just did it. He has that sense of the juggler, the vulnerable point, and doesn't hesitate to exploit it. and he did it with Hillary Clinton as well. And that's, quite frankly, what happened in 2016. We had a negative campaign. It was about fear. Donald Trump was about fear, people seeing their own prospects, horizon shrinking, of jobs that had left, of cities that had been hollowed out, of changes in mores and customs in the country, and seeming that they were forgotten, if not ignored. And the reality was there were 208 counties in the United States that voted twice for Barack Obama and then voted for Donald Trump. They were not racists. It's very easy to say, oh, everybody voted for Trump, that it was not based on race. No, because they twice voted for an African-American president. And Hillary Clinton's campaign was based on fear of Donald Trump. And that's all. And that, sadly, what we came out of with a negative election that he won because he was running against her. And that fear of the American middle class, of their moving down, not up, the fear of enemies both abroad and at home that he did not hesitate to exploit, about government and gridlock serving only apparently special interest. That really was at work in the election of 2016. And we had an election that we've just gone through in this country in 2018. It was a rather remarkable election in this sense that not simply that the Democrats picked up 40 House seats, which was the most that Democrats have won since Watergate in 1974, but it was that they won the popular vote in the country by over 9 million votes. That's more than any presidential margin of victory all the way back to 1984. It was a convincing, thorough Democratic victory in 2016, in 2018. Not here, although certainly in House elections the Democrats did well. But there was a change demographically across the nation. And I think it's an important one, and one that hasn't gotten the kind of attention that it should have and deserves. Among the Democrats, among voters between the ages of 18 and 29, carry the vote 67 to 32%, better than 2 to 1. But Democrats also won 61% of all voters in the country between the ages of 18 and 44. That Donald Trump carried white women by 9% over Hillary Clinton in 2016. But white women split right down the middle in 2018. And among unmarried women, they split 66 to 31 for Democrats. And Democrats carried married women by 10%. Obviously, that includes all race. So the change demographically among young voters in particular is this. The typical Democratic voter in 2018 is moving from her own room to an apartment of her own, someday hoping to get a house of their own. The typical Republican voter is moving from his own home to the nursing home, to the funeral home. And that is a big, big difference demographically, and one that should not be and cannot be ignored. I do think that politics in our country is not simply important, it's the business of all of us, and every one of us to be involved and to step up and take responsibility for what has happened in the country. Understand this, that the health and well-being and vitality of any political party, whether it's a local party or a state party or a national party, is whether that party is looking for converts or it's searching out for heretics. Are you looking for converts and saying, welcome, come on in. We agree on more than we disagree. We agree on 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 issues, because a political party is not a social club. It's not something you have to believe 23 things, and if you don't believe the 23, you're banished to the outer darkness. A political party is a coalition of people, of like minds who come together trying to win elections to change policies. And that is so important. A healthy, vibrant party is reaching out and welcoming converts. A narrow, shrinking, mean-spirited party is a party that's banishing heretics to the outer darkness. I'm sorry, you didn't pass the litmus test. You can't be a full-fledged member of our party. That's a guarantee of minority status for a long run, and in the long run. This election that we just went through, and this enormously one, you can't ignore the Year of the Woman, an all-time record, 234 women running for Congress, 182 Democratic women and 52 Republican women. That somebody was criticizing Donald Trump's job record the other day. I don't know how you can. I mean, there's 56 new Democrats going to be in office in January who didn't have jobs until Donald Trump was president. They just won. There are over 100 women elected to the House, more than ever before. But there are warning signals from this election, and make no mistake about it. The green wave is going to drown us all. By the green wave, I'm afraid our elections are on the verge of becoming an auction, a public auction. Democrats raised over $1 billion. When you get millions of dollars in outside money, we have no idea where it's coming from, especially on both sides, but particularly on the Republican side. It is non-party groups spent over $1 billion this cycle, up sharply from just $550 million 4 years ago. That is not healthy for our system, our democracy, and in our country. The Republicans in blue America will need to find the balance between being Trump devotees and Republican renegades. Since Kevin McCarthy, the Republican House leader, was elected to the House from California, the Republican delegation in California has gone from 19 down to 9. And I don't know how you run as a Republican in California. They just lost 7 seats. Orange County, which was the home office of Reagan and Goldwater conservatism in California and in the nation, 4 members of Congress are now all Democrats. There are no Republicans left in Orange County representing it in Washington, D.C. So the issue of health care will gain more momentum in 2019 and 2020. And I think you can look for the president to pull a sort of a Bill Clinton welfare reform move on health care to try and get out in front of that issue. He is resourceful. He is resilient. Make no mistake about him. So it is a time, I think, of some hope and some encouragement. I think it's awfully important for us as a people, to recognize and to assert what we've done right in this country and the successes we've had. When I came to Washington, it was a segregated city. It was a city where African Americans could not eat in the same restaurants that I could eat in, where in fact they could not go to the same movie theaters or sit in the same sections of the movie theater at least. And because of the courage and the leadership of a number of politicians, many Republicans, and in particular the Texas in the White House named Lyndon Johnson, we changed that. And then 4 years later, a year later, in 1965, I was lucky enough to be working on Capitol Hill and working on the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act was truly a test of power. It was one thing to allow African Americans to stay in hotels or eat in restaurants or travel on interstate commerce. That was maybe an inconvenience. But when you started talking about making sure that African Americans could vote, or the Latinos could vote, under the Voting Rights Act. That was talking about political power and potential job threats to a number of office holders. And there was a long fight. There was truly a filibuster in the Congress. It went on for 71 days. And this was a real filibuster where they went night and day. And every day, the sponsors of that legislation, there were 4 senators who were in the lead. The sponsor of that legislation, Everett Dirksen was a Republican Senate leader from Illinois. Mike Mansfield was the Democratic Majority Leader from Montana. Jacob Javits was the Republican Senator from New York. And Phil Hart, perhaps the most decent man I've ever known in public life, was the senator from Michigan, was the other Democrat. And every day they would meet in Senator Dirksen's office. And they would go before the television cameras and the reporters and answer questions. How long is this going to go on? Can you defeat the filibuster? And every day, Everett Dirksen, those old enough in the audience to remember, a man of Shakespearean quality and a real ham and loved to speak. And Dirksen would go on with these mellifluous phrases. And Mike Mansfield from Montana, who was a reticent man, a man who went on Face the Nation, and they ran out of questions after 22 minutes. He would say, yup, nope, can't say, won't say. And Mansfield standing there, Dirksen goes on, and after a couple of weeks ago, this chief of staff of one Democratic senator was sent by a senator to see Senator Mansfield's chief of staff. And he said, look, he said, every day, people on television, it was on 5 times a day on network television. Every day they go on, and they see the 4 up there, and it's always Dirksen. It's at Dirksen's office, and Dirksen's, the dominant Shakespearean hem that he's going on, and Mansfield's not saying a word. And, this is being pushed by a Democratic president, Lyndon Johnson, being pushed by a Democratic party. And I think at least a couple of days a week they ought to meet in Mansfield's office. So Mansfield's chief of staff went to see Mike Mansfield. And he said to him, Senator, this has been raised. That, it's just seen that this is seen as a Republican bill rather than a Democratic bill, even though President Johnson's pushing it, even though you're a sponsor of it. And Mike Mansfield turned to his own person, his own chief of staff, and said, last year, in 1964, the Republican Party, because it deserted the principles and values of Abraham Lincoln, suffered a terrible defeat with Barry Goldwater as a standard bearer. Anything that helps people see that the Republican Party is returning to the roots of Lincoln and of civil rights leadership is good for the Republican Party, and it's good for the United States of America. I don't ever want to hear this raised again. That's the kind of leadership that we're looking for today. It's the kind of leadership we need that's above and beyond party, that is for country. I mean, we did learn a couple of truths in 2018. It wasn't the economy, stupid. The economy was really doing quite well, exceptionally well, but that was not the deciding factor. We'd also learned that all politics, unlike what Tip O'Neill said, is not local, it is national. I mean, 2 out of 3 voters said the economy was either excellent or very good. And the fact is that the Republicans had won the suburbs with 51% of the total in 2014. They, in 2018, rather, they ran 12 points worse than they had in 2014. And this was about something more, something central. The final analysis, we did have health care, which had been a liability for Democrats in the elections of 10, 12, 14, and 16, become an asset, because the issue was about abolishing pre-existing conditions, which the Republicans had voted to do in their repeal. And for the first time, it became actually an asset for the Democrats. Now, midterm elections are no predictor of presidential elections. The Republicans won 54 House seats and a majority control of the House in 1994, yet 2 years later, Bill Clinton was reelected. The Republicans won 63 House seats and recaptured the majority in 2010, and yet 2 years later, Barack Obama was reelected. So it's not a guarantee by any means at all that that Donald Trump's days are numbered. To some degree, in 2016, what we had was what I'd call a Mae West election. For those of you in the audience too young to remember Mae West, she was one of the original blonde bombshells in Hollywood, a rather earthy lady given to rather profane observations. And she once said, when forced to choose between two evils, I like to pick the one I haven't tried before. So the Democrats, what are they going to do? Are they going to go run pell-mell to the left and find the most liberal candidate and then nominate him or her and make the campaign all about their nominee? The Democrats, if you recall, in 1976 and 1992, made very practical decisions. They nominated in 1976 a Southern governor, Jimmy Carter, who won the presidency. In 1992, they nominated a Southern governor, Bill Clinton, who won the presidency. Contrast that with 1972, when the Democrats, after Richard Nixon barely won the presidency in 1968, decided to nominate George McGovern, very decent man, but because he was the most vehemently anti-war of all the Democratic candidates against the Vietnam War, and Richard Nixon won 49 of the 50 states. In 1988, in 1984, the Democrats made the choice of nominating Walter Mondale, a wonderful man, really a good man, but who checked all the boxes on all the Democratic issues, from labor to liberal to women to civil rights to you name it. And every one of them, he didn't deviate, and he ended up losing 49 states. The Democrats better figure out if they want to win in 2016. They've got to figure out who first can get them to the White House. Politics is a matter of addition, not subtractions. Parties are about coalitions. They're not private social clubs. It is so important to remember. And I will say this about losing parties. A party that loses the presidency invariably goes through 4 stages of defeat, invariably. The first stage when a party loses is they blame their own candidate, all right? I remember in 2000 when the Democrats lost, it was Al Gore's fault. Why was it Al Gore's fault? Al Gore was so dull, so boring, his Secret Service name was Al Gore. What the Republicans said was, oh, it was Mitt Romney's fault. Damn Mitt Romney, geez, I'm telling you, he's too damn perfect, And they always want to blame their own candidate because it gets the blame off of the party for anything it's done. Okay? Then the second stage of defeat is you got to find the gimmick. There was some gimmick the other side's using that allowed them to win and us to lose. The Republicans lost 4 times to Franklin Roosevelt. And they finally figured out what it was. Radio. FDR was so damn good on radio. If we could get somebody who could do those fireside chats, we'd win too. Ronald Reagan won 2 landslides, 44 states one time, 49 the next. What'd the Democrats say? Television. Geez, if we could just get somebody as good on TV, as though the answer to the Democrats' problem was to nominate Roseanne Barr and Dick Vitale as a ticket, for goodness sakes. But the third place on the compass of defeated parties is the most dangerous point of all. And I think this is where Democrats have strayed in the past, and it's one where they can't go. And that is blame the customer. It's the voters' fault. When the voters voted for us, they were smart. They were patriotic. They were generous. They were thoughtful. Now, they voted against us. They're mean-spirited. They're narrow-minded. They're stupid. They're uninformed. We only have 2 parties. If you're going to win, you got to get 51%. If you're going to call more than half the people ethical eunuchs and moral lepers, you're probably not going to win their support on a regular basis. The stage 4 defeat is get me a winner. I don't care who the hell it is. That's how the Republicans got Dwight Eisenhower, all right? Up until 1 year before his nomination, Dwight Eisenhower had belonged to neither a church nor a political party. In those 12 months, he became, in turn, a Republican and a Presbyterian. Now, I couldn't understand why, because if you're going to be a Republican, why not be an Episcopalian? They're better dressers. But the Democrats wanted a winner with Jimmy Carter. They wanted a winner with Bill Clinton. They wanted a winner who could be president as well. I'm not saying that's all it is. It doesn't end on Election Day. But nothing changes unless you win on Election Day. And that truly is so, so important. And understanding that American voters are philosophically conservative, but we're operationally liberal. And what do I mean by that? You say, ask American voters, how about the federal government? Pain in the neck. Too much red tape. Get them off my back, out of my hair, can't stand them. Boy, I'd say that's pretty, in the abstract, pretty damn conservative. However, those same American people, including me, when told that just outside of Pocatello, Idaho, a single can of tuna fish has been discovered with a trace of botulism in it, have a straightforward American reaction. Where the hell was the federal government? I want a report on my desk in 24 hours, and I want heads to roll. So we are philosophically conservative, but operationally liberal, and we have to acknowledge the successes we have had as a people, and they are enormous. In the middle of the Civil War, the bloodiest experience this nation has ever gone through, a young Republican congressman from Vermont named Justin Morrill had a radical notion that every state be given 20,000 acres of land for each member of Congress in that state's delegation, and with that land and the proceeds from it, that state could build a public college or university available to the young men and women of that state. That was the land-grant system. The first school built was MIT. The second was Cornell. Then the great universities of Ohio and Michigan, all the way up to California, down to Texas. A system, let it be noted, that has produced more Nobel Prize winners than all the universities of Europe combined. At a time when we did it, in the middle of the Civil War, with Abraham Lincoln in the White House, fewer than 1 out of 20 Americans that even set foot on a college campus. In the middle of World War II, when 12% of all Americans served in the military, this country embarked upon an incredible act of social imagination and social mobility called the GI Bill. Incredible. A system that said, we will educate you for your service, for what you have done for your country to give you the opportunity that you hadn't been given before. A system that has produced 433,000 teachers, 79,000 doctors and dentists. When NASA was created, all of the scientists that went to work for NASA were graduates under the GI Bill. It's just remarkable. Remarkable, the Nobel Prize winners it's produced. It's an amazing achievement, an amazing accomplishment, what we've done. We've removed 95% of the lead from the air. We saved the Great Lakes that were dying, the greatest freshwater gift any benevolent architect of this universe could ever bestow on a people. They were dying. Fish life was dying in Lake Erie. And we stopped it. And we did it. We did it with a Republican president in the White House, Richard Nixon, and a Democratic majority on Capitol Hill. And we changed it. And we've taken poison out of the air. Not all of it and not enough of it. But as a consequence of that, our kids' lives are healthier. And our own lives are healthier. We've made enormous progress in bringing justice, of opening up opportunity and responsibility to women in our country, to people of color. It is a great, great achievement. And no places have been greater than in the United States military. The United States military stands as the leader on the desegregation of our society and the integration of our society, where you are not judged on the basis of the color of your skin, but on your competence and your skill and your leadership. And those are great successes that we can build from and build on. We can't let that pessimism infect us. We just can't. Because in the final analysis, the question is not, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? It's, are we better off? Are the weak among us more protected? Are the strong among us more just? Because every one of us has been warmed by fires we did not build. Every one of us is drunk from wells we did not dig. We can do no less for those who come after us, and together, with goodwill and commitment and dedication, we can do more. Thank you so very, very much. Thank you. Okay, want to stay here? Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's
The audience.
I know, thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Arthur Emerson with KLRN, where you frequently see Mark Shields on the NewsHour Monday through Friday. How many of you watch the NewsHour?
Hey.
We are delighted to be part of the Maverick Lecture Series this year. We can't thank the Scanlon family, Bill, enough, and John Scanlon and the Scanlon family, and what a great privilege to be at the great Trinity University to hold this lecture series. So thank you very much, Danny. And when Mark Shields was in the military serving his country as a Marine from, 59 to 61, 62, Bill Maul started KLRN in 1962. Bill, thank you so much for giving us KLRN. We have a few minutes, 10 or 15 at most, to have the pleasure of asking Mark Shields some questions, and I believe there are 3 mics, one to my right, your left, and one over here at the stage right, my left, and I believe there should be one upstairs over here at in that direction of the balcony of the. So if you would like, please come to one of these 2 mics, and we'll start over here in my right. If you want to ask Mark Shields a question, or if you want to have a question for Danny or Bill Scanlon about all of the good things that are happening in San Antonio, but I know you want to ask Mark, we will start over here. I believe we have a gentleman approaching. Please state your name and let us know what you're concerned about.
I'm Bert Clayton, and I'd like to know what you think is going to happen, excuse me, to the free press.
Think it's going to happen?
Free press.
Free press, or do we have a free press?
The question is what I think is going to happen with the free press, and do we have a free press? No, I think the free press is flawed as somebody who's in it and of it, but it is flawed by human fallibility and not by malignant intent or conspiracy or anything of the sort. To charge that is irresponsible, reckless, and dangerous to our democracy. Make no mistake about it. The vast majority of the people I know in the profession work hard and long and fairly to report the news. The reality is we have a changed broadcast system now. We have what is called, I think rightly so, silo audiences. I mean, you can't watch an hour of MSNBC and then watch an hour of Fox News and think you're talking about the same country. And so, but I don't want to mistake that for what the free press is, because 3.5 million people watch Fox. That's all. Now, they're the leader at 3.5 million. I don't mean to minimize their importance or their impact and what their support of Donald Trump meant to his candidacy. But it's not a majority of the country by any means. And there are thousands and thousands of journalists out working every day to deliver news to you. Go ahead.
Do you think it is endangered by our president?
Do I think it's endangered by the president? I don't think on Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is the least curious man I've ever covered in national life. I mean, he really is. He's not curious about the country. He's not somebody who thinks the way that other presidents have thought. He isn't. I mean, it's a transactional world that he lives in, where I do this for you, you do this for me. And there, as far as enduring principles of what the United States has stood for, and I am in great admiration for what the United States has stood for in most instances, with serious mistakes, and make no mistake about it, and I include both Iraq and Vietnam in that category. But whether it's rebuilding a war-torn Europe in the most unselfish act of any winner in world history, of rebuilding Japan and bringing democracy to Japan and Germany, and restoring free, being an inspiration throughout all of Europe to the Cold War. And I just don't think he understands that. I don't think, quite honestly, Secretary Mattis, whom I know not well, but I like and admire, brought President Trump in July of 2017 to what's called the Tank, the secure meeting place at the Pentagon, and where they went through almost a tutorial on the United States in post-World War II and what we have done, and the trade agreements we've created, and the security pacts that we've established, and the reciprocal agreements back and forth. And about 2 hours into it, Trump exploded and said, "This is what I don't want to hear. This is what's absolutely wrong." And he had no interest and he had no understanding. So I don't know if he has he looks at everything in a personal sense. It's good press if it's good for him. If it's at all critical, then it's bad. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, it's not complex. It's pretty straightforward. You're on my side or you're not. And Hannity's on his side, and Tucker Carlson's on his side, and the New York Times isn't. And so, that's really the world in which he lives. I do think that the free press has risen to the challenge better in the past 2 years than it did in the previous 2 years. And I think it's stronger and more vibrant today than it was. But make no mistake about it, that he's not going to defend it from assault from beyond. Okay.
Let's
Yes.
go to the balcony. We have a gentleman upstairs.
Okay.
Thank you. To get back to the sort of politics that you're talking about, there are a number of structural problems, gerrymandering, you mentioned the power of dark money, unfettered influence of corporations, trust. Anyway, do you see any opportunities in the short to medium term for the country to actually deal with those and overcome some of those structural problems?
Sure. Okay, and that's a good question about the question of gerrymandering in particular, where the districts are drawn. I mean, if you win the national election by 9 million votes, you probably ought to pick up more than 40 House seats, out of 435. But because the way the districts are drawn, and I give the Republicans credit. The Republicans set out in the middle of the Obama first term to win state legislative seats, and win them they did. And the Obama operation, the Obama White House, was not engaged in recruiting Democratic candidates to run for the legislature. And in the course of Obama's 2 terms, the Democrats lost 1,000 state legislative seats. And the Republicans drew the lines. I mean, in a state like Ohio, which historically has never voted for a loser, save one time. It voted for Nixon in 1960. Every other time it's voted for the winner. It's back and forth. And yet, in its congressional delegation, it's 3-1 Republican because of it. That's the same way Pennsylvania was until the court overthrew it. And in a number of states this past election, they put before voters redrawing, and in fact in Ohio as well, to have an independent commission draw the lines rather than have it done through the party apparatus, as it's done in Iowa and in Arizona. Both of those states use that. And that is on the move. That is a popular move, and I'd say it's emerging, and I'm hopeful that by 2020 that we'll have a far fairer and more just redrawing of the lines. One of the problems that Democrats have, quite honestly, is they live in the same places. Where the Democrats, live in the central cities and the close-in suburbs. So it's tough to draw districts that extend out. The Democrats are packed in. I don't know, they like each other. They concentrate each other. I don't know what the hell it is, but they got to disperse. If you're a Democrat, move out to a red area, take it over, subvert it. But that is one of the real problems. The money thing, my only hope, I used to raise money politically, and I learned 2 things. The worst thing in politics is to get an envelope given to you with 4 $100 bills in it. Why do I say 4 $100 bills? Because nobody in the history of humankind has ever given $400 to a campaign. They've given 500 or they've given 1,000. So it means the person giving you the envelope has either taken 100 or 600. You don't know. But the most important lesson I learned raising money politically is that God gives money to the least interesting, least attractive, and least thoughtful of her creatures. I don't know how many times I've sat with some absolute certifiable who's given me a theory about how left-handed Unitarians have taken over the world and why we've got to do this, and you just say, give me the check, please. Just give me the damn check. So I applaud the fact that more people are giving and giving in smaller amounts, but we need full and total disclosure of every dollar that is given. No more hiding behind, the Committee for Noble Democracy or whatever other theory come up with. But I'm hopeful. What's going to take? It's going to take a major scandal to change the money completely. Wow. It's going to take somebody being caught on one of these saying, "Hey, I don't care. I gave the son of a bitch $100,000. He's going to vote the way we want him to." It's going to take that for people to really be shocked. Because it is a green wave. It isn't a blue wave or a red wave. It's a green wave in our politics.
Mark, we have a lady over here
Yes.
on our left.
Okay.
So, given you have seen so much transformation of the military and the military's presence in society, do you think there's ever going to be another draft?
Oh, about a draft? I am an unpopular liberal because I believe devoutly in national service. Okay? Mandatory national service. I believe, I mentioned just from a personal point of view, the first time I slept in the same quarters with African Americans, but the remarkable experience about Paris Island and the 13 weeks of hell that I spent there was that I went into a platoon of 76 men, 9 of whom were college graduates, including me, 9 of whom had been sent by judges who had given them the option of either joining the Marines or serving in the reformatory. And at the end of 13 weeks, we were a unit. We knew each other. We knew people across ethnic, racial, class, and economic lines. And they became our friends and our brothers. And we were all Americans together. And I think that's so important. It is no accident that from 1945 to 1973, this country embarked in 19, count them, military interventions around the world. Once the draft was ended, and it was a collusion. It was a collusion of Richard Nixon, who was tired and objected and resented that campuses were upset and picketing him and all the rest of it, and picketing his administration and ranting against him, and by upper middle class liberals who didn't want their sons to go in the draft. So the two came into collusion secretly, quietly, not even acknowledging the other was on the side, and they abolished the draft. Since the draft was abolished, 43 times this country has been in interventions or actions around the world. Twice as many. When you don't have the children of the powerful and the influential and the affluent exposed, it's a lot easier to talk about, let's send them. Who the hell are you sending? You're sending brothers and sons and sisters and daughters into harm's way. And when we were going to war in Iraq, I and my assistant, a woman named Diana Druzia, called all 535 officers on Capitol Hill. And we asked but one question. Does the senator or member of Congress have a child in the enlisted ranks of the United States military? Why do we say the enlisted ranks? Say the enlisted ranks for a very simple reason. 3/4 of the casualties come from E5 and below. They don't come to colonels or admirals. God love them. Okay? Out of 535, there was one. Tim Johnson, the Democratic senator from South Dakota, his son Brooks was a sergeant in the 101st Airborne. When we went to war in World War II, the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, 4 sons all served in combat. In combat. Not in a desk job, not 2,000 miles behind the lines. You know, Ted Williams cost 5.5 years of his career. Major League Hall of Fame career to serve in the Marine Corps as a pilot. And across the board, that was the case. And I will say this, since we went to war in Afghanistan in 2001, we have had a total of 3 tax cuts. We won't even sacrifice to pay for the war. We haven't been called upon to do it. And in the final analysis, an army doesn't fight a war. A country fights a war. And if a country is not willing to fight a war, it should never send an army. It is unfair. So, I just want foreign policy and national security to be part of every breakfast table discussion. Not something that we, oh, thank you for your service at the airport when you pass them in line. Or, you know, could I buy you a Coke or something? Because every one of them has dreams, has hopes, has family, has loved ones. We have to remember it and we have to share it. And I think it's so important for us as a country because we're afraid. We've moved apart. We are a stratified country now. People don't know each other from different religious, ethnic, educational, class, economic strata. And I just think that's our hope. And there's plenty to be done. There's plenty to be done in this country. And there's talent and energy and skill to do it. So we need the will and we need the leadership. So that's it. Okay.
Regrettably, we're out of time. We're going to have one more question, and you've been waiting the longest, young lady, so you will be the last to ask Mark a question.
This is a question about politics, so it's not quite as grandiose and as important as the last one, so I apologize. A very smart friend of mine pointed out that right after the printing press was invented, there was about 50 years of terribleness because books became cheap and knowledge was not as well thought out as before. I'm wondering, with your only slightly longer than my history with politics, if you feel like the invention of the internet is going to have the same 50 years of horribleness as we figure out how to work with it properly.
Yeah, boy, I wish it's a great question. I wish I had a good answer for it. I'm afraid of the isolating quality of the internet. I really am, there was there is the idea that if I have a thought, no matter how bizarre or how antisocial it can be, I can find somebody just outside of Helena, Montana, who agrees with me. Nothing against Helena, don't get me wrong. I like Helena. New Bedford, Massachusetts. I mean, and so it kind of sanctions aberrational or bizarre attitudes and values. But I don't in any way demean it or in any way diminish it as a source of information and knowledge. I mean, it just is. It settles more arguments than, oh yeah, you thought it won the Academy Award? No, it didn't win the Academy Award. No, To Kill a Mockingbird won the Academy Award that year. So it's capacity. I'm just not sure. I worry about the invasion of privacy. I worry about all of that. And you know, the more we do learn about how our attitudes and information are subverted, is disturbing. But I have a tough time explaining what happened in the last 50 years without predicting what's going to happen in the next 50 years. But I will say this about the next election. There's only 3 things the Democrats have to do in order to win in 2020. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. Thank you very much.
Round of applause. So we have a closing gift for Mark.
Okay.
In recognition of your Maverick spirit,
All right.
which is a reflection of Maury Maverick Jr.
Yep.
This is a book. It is the history of the Maverick family in Texas. The author is sitting right here on the front row. It's been autographed by him, Louis Fisher.
Okay.
So thank you so much for being here.
Terrific.
A round
Thank
of
you.
applause.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
There are more copies of the book for sale in the lobby out here. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of this 10th anniversary celebration.